The bracha for studying Torah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshana b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who makes us holy with mitzvot and commands us to engage in words of Torah. So among many other things that we read in this week's Parsha, we find the verse in Deuteronomy 10, Ve'ata Yisrael, ma Adonai Elohecha shoel me'imach. And now Israel, what does Adonai your God ask of you? Ki im lira et Adonai Elohecha lalechet bechol drachav ulahava oto ve'la'avod et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha uvechol nefshecha, to revere Adonai your God, to walk in all God's ways, to love God and serve Adonai your God with all your heart and with all of your soul. Lishmor et mitzvot Adonai v'et chukotav asher anochi mitzavcha hayom letov lecha. Keeping Adonai's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good. Therefore, the text is saying, direct your heart and mind, your feelings and thoughts and emotions and your loyalties and your body and your feet. That's right, your feet. Walk in God's ways. Walk in God's ways. Not only walking, but also doing with all the limbs of your body, doing mitzvot, but also with your feet. I'm drawn to that this week, with your feet, because the name of this week's Torah reading, Ekev, actually means heel, like the heel of your foot. It's the first significant word of the passage. It begins in Deuteronomy 7, chapter 7, verse 12, and is one of those strange passages that surely sparks a lot of midrash. V'haya ekev tishma'un et hamishpatim ha'ela. And if you do obey the rules and observe them carefully, the Lord your God will maintain faithfully for you the covenant that God made on oath with your ancestors. But probably more literally, it means, and it will be on the heels of observing these rules, and you're guarding them, and you're doing them. On the heels of that, the Lord your God will guard for you the covenant and the compassion that God swore to your ancestors. On the heels. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who lived in the 20th century, died in 1972, marched with Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. And afterwards he said, I felt that I was praying with my feet. Heschel, coming as he did from a long line of Hasidic rabbis, often taught that religious awareness began with a sense of wonder and not taking things for granted. Don't take things for granted. Pray with your feet and know that everything about you can be a prayer. In many ways, I think the section of Torah from Deuteronomy 8 speaks beautifully to this and many other things. I will read that section, Deuteronomy 8. Starting in verse 7. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and springs and fountains issuing from plain and hill, a land of wheat and barley, of vines, figs and pomegranates, a land of olive trees, and honey, a land where you may eat food without stint, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron and from whose hills you can mine copper. When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to the Lord your God for the good land which God has given you. Take care lest you forget Adonai your God and fail to keep God's commandments, God's rules, and God's laws, which I enjoin upon you today. When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything you own has prospered, beware lest your heart grow haughty, and you forget Adonai your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its seraph serpents and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it, who brought forth water for you from the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your ancestors had never known, in order to test you by hardships, only to benefit you in the end. Beware lest you say to yourselves, my own power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. Remember that it is Adonai your God who gives you the power to get wealth in fulfillment of the covenant that God made on oath with your ancestors, as is still the case. Especially when you have everything you need, do not take anything for granted. I sometimes think that's what's going on with Sukkot. We build these temporary booths outside of our houses. It's just like some nomadic people, sometimes after they've been nomadic and they start settling down into settled houses, they'll still build temporary houses outside. They feel more comfortable being there. And more to the point, when you move into those permanent houses, the old ways fall apart. And so might those old values. So Moses is saying, when you move into this new place, especially, do not take things for granted. You will be tempted to take them for granted. It's always easier that way. You will think that the wealth you have is all the result of your work alone, and you will forget the extreme extent to which, in fact, no one is independent, but ultimately everyone is dependent on others around them, on others in society, in the proper workings of the environment, and ultimately on shehechianu, that which sustains us, that which sustains you and sustains the universe. Remember, says the Torah, that it is not you and your hand and your strength that has gathered your wealth, but that it is God who has given you the power to gather whatever it is you have. The life force that breathes through you. The implication of that statement to me is always flabbergasting. Yes, we can do what we can on our own to gather wealth or to improve ourselves, but ultimately our ability to do anything is not of our own making. We never gave ourselves or built for ourselves the ability to move a limb or to move a finger. We never gave ourselves the ability to speak or to see or to hear or to walk or to think or to grip anything with our hands or to make anything. None of us are self-made persons because we did not make for ourselves the ability to do anything. We actually don't really know how our human ability to move or make, create, or impact anything around us connects to the rest of ourselves. The connection between our minds and our bodies, the ability of our limbs to respond to our minds and of so many parts of our bodies to operate without any conscious commands from our minds, all working to keep us alive 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's all a mystery to us. And even were we able to understand it, this does not mean we could replicate it. It's kind of like this example I brought here. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. All its leaves are folded up now because it's nighttime. It's a mimosa tree. It's a little mimosa tree that started from a seed I picked up under the tree just down the alley here. I didn't expect anything to grow, actually. But there it is, a little mimosa tree. I put the seed in the soil, I put water there, but that's all I did. And it's doing its thing. It's probably not taking anything for granted. Ultimately, we cannot take credit for anything we have the ability to do. We can only take responsibility for what we do with this wondrous situation we find ourselves in. And it is in that responsibility, literally the call to respond in a fashion worthy of the opportunity that we have been given. It's there that the concept of mitzvah is rooted. Mitzvah as command, obligation, or responsibility. So my one-sentence condensation of all of Jewish mysticism boiled down into one ever-present question is, how does the light of God's presence come into this world through you? Ultimately, it is through the life force flowing through our very beings into the world through us, the flow of Shehechianu, that which sustains us, into us and through us into the world. But through us into the world only insofar as we respond so as to build up creation with it rather than to tear it down. Only if we live out divine mitzvot and practices that rebound upon us for our own collective good. That way, as the Jewish mystics would describe it, we utilize the light of the divine spark within us to return the divine sparks around us back to their originating source. Utilizing the light of the divine spark within us to return the divine sparks around us back to their originating source. And please think of these images in their metaphorical sense, not as literal matter. For the truth of these words is in their description of relationships between aspects of our own reality, rather than in literal readings of concrete physical status of elements. So, pray with your feet and your hands and your eyes and your ears and your head and your heart and your body and soul. Pray with all your limbs and with all your possessions, your power and wealth, for in this way, the life force which flows through you is returned to good. These are all given to you in order for you to return them to their proper place in the world and to return the world to its proper place. May you find peace in the coming Shabbat and the days that follow. Everyone, Shabbat Shalom.